They thought a vest and a clipboard could scare us in a submission HOA, cops stitched on the front, fake violation notices clutched in hand, and that smug, I'm untouchable grin. But Doug didn't know that the moment he pointed a gun at my daughter, he'd crossed into a world where intimidation didn't matter, because my daughter, is FBI. Before I get too deep, tell me where you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. I'm Sarah Mitchell. About a year ago, after a brutal divorce, I moved into Oakwood Estates hoping for a fresh start. On the surface, it was perfect. Manicured lawns, brick driveways, neighbors waving by the clubhouse, but underneath, the HOA was rotten. Karen Bloom, the secretary, ran the HOA like a tiny empire. White curtains only, no cars parked after 8 p.m., even rules about how mailboxes had to line up perfectly. And every violation came with a fine. $200, $500, sometimes more. At first, I laughed it off, thinking it was petty, but then Karen went nuclear. One afternoon at a board meeting, she introduces Doug broad-shouldered, shaved head, mirrored sunglasses. He strolls in wearing a black vest screaming, HOA cop. Karen announces, all self-satisfied, this community needs enforcement. Doug will ensure compliance. I nearly dropped my jaw. Enforcement? Oakwood Estates had no legal HOA standing, no contracts, no deputies, nothing. Doug, though he soaked it all up, he strutted around like a sheriff, tapping doors, shoving violations into mailboxes, threatening people with escalation. The first time he came to my house, he yelled at me for leaving a recycling bin out past 6, tapping that patch on his vest. One more time and you'll regret it, he said. And it wasn't just Mayhay-painted red XS on neighbors' driveways. Fine a woman $1,000 for her non-approved roof. None of it had legal weight, but his presence was terrifying by design. At home, I vented to my daughter Jessica. She just moved back after years away. Quiet, disciplined, calm under pressure. I didn't know the half of it. Yeah, but there was something in the way she listened, like she was holding back a lot more than she let on. Then came the call that froze my blood. I was out running errands when my phone buzzed. Jessica's voice, steady but urgent. Mom, there's a man pointing a gun at me. My chest slammed tight. Doug. It had to be Doug. And right then, I knew this wasn't about HOA fines, Anna Maria, it was survival. I tore back toward Oakwood Estates, Jessica's words echoing like gunshots in my skull. By the time I skidded onto our street, chaos had taken over. Neighbors were on porches, phones raised, whispers bouncing like static. And there he was, Doug, vest stretched across his chest, pistol in hand, sweat glistening. My daughter stood on the porch, unervingly calm, her eyes locked on him like a hawk stalking prey. Doug barked, trembling between rage and fear. This community needs order. You, Mitchell, you're going to be an example. And before I could scream, he fired. The blast cracked the afternoon air. Mothers screamed. Someone dropped behind a minivan. The sharp tang of gunpowder hit my nose. Jessica didn't flinch. Her voice cut through panic. That was a threat, and threats have consequences. In a blur, she moved faster than anyone could register, drew her own weapon, stepped off the porch, and fired one precise round. Doug screamed, clutching his leg, collapsing to the driveway. His gun clattered uselessly. The neighbors gasped. She shot him, someone whispered. No, she saved us, another muttered. Jessica advanced, calm, deliberate, boots pinning him down. Then she pulled out a black leather badge, wallet gold letters glinting in the sun. Federal Bureau of Investigation, she said, voice razor sharp. Tactical commander. And this man just committed felony impersonation and reckless endangerment. Silence fell. Phone zoomed in. Sandra, the HOA secretary who'd appointed Doug, staggered back, face white as chalk. Neighbors whispered disbelief. She's FBI, no wonder she didn't even blink. Doug groaned, clutching his leg. This is illegal. You can't shoot me. Jessica's eyes narrowed. Badge inches from his face. You impersonated an officer. Fired a weapon in a residential neighborhood. threatened a civilian. That's 2 federal felonies and a state weapons charge. And thanks to all these cameras, it's on video. The distant wail of sirens rose. Jessica didn't flinch. She kept her stance, badge gleaming, weapon steady as Doug writhed, humiliated. For the first time, the neighborhood understood. This wasn't just my daughter, this was the FBI. Deputies swarmed, red and blue lights flashing across the lawn. Neighbors stayed back, phones recording every angle. Doug tried to bark excuses, but Jessica's badge left no room for doubt. He was cuffed, vest now a pathetic joke under the flashing lights. Impersonating an officer, unlawful discharge of a firearm, reckless endangerment. Jessica told them flatly. He doesn't walk. Doug spat. I was doing my job. The HOA gave me authority. Jessica stepped closer, towering over him. No, HOA has the power to arm citizens and call them police. That's a lie. Now you face the law. The deputies nodded grimly. One leaned down. You're lucky she only shot your leg. Any other FBI commander would have dropped you center mass. The crowd erupted. Years of HOA intimidation, fines, threats all crumbling. But the fallout wasn't done. Sandra tried to slip back into the crowd, but Jessica's voice cut like a whip. Deputies, stop her. She's complicit. Hands trembling, Sandra was brought forward. Jessica listed the charges: fraudulent HOA funds, conspiracy to impersonate law enforcement, authorization of illegal harassment. Her face drained white, shrieked, "You can't do this." Jessica tilted her head. "Watch me." Both were loaded into separate cruisers. The crowd cheered, clapped, some hugging each other, the sense of injustice finally dissipating. My chest loosened for the first time since moving into Oakwood Estates. My daughter, my FBI tactical commander daughter, had dismantled their entire operation in a single afternoon. Before the cruisers pulled away, she turned to the cameras still rolling, voice carrying to anyone watching live. This is what happens when bullies pretend to be the law. They end up facing the real one. As the sirens faded, I realized something profound. Fear might have ruled Oakwood Estates for years, but courage and justice? They could never be silenced. And somewhere in the distance, I knew Sandra and Doug would be rethinking every move they made, while the neighborhood whispered, debated, and replayed every second. So, tell me, would you have done if that were your street? Would you have cowered under the HOA's fake authority? Or would you have stood your ground, no matter what? Drop a comment, share your thoughts, and let's talk about what justice really looks like when the powerless finally fight back. That a millionaire froze the moment he saw a little girl in ragged clothes, hair tangled, hands dirty, struggling to feed her baby brother with an old, chipped bottle. Her eyes, though, caught his in a way that made his chest tight and tender, but unyielding, like she'd already seen more of the world than anyone should at her age. He never imagined that this fleeting encounter, barely a few seconds, would change everything. Before we dive in, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and rate this story from 1 to 10. If something's weighing on you, I'm here to listen, because sometimes even a little reflection can spark the first step toward healing. He paused, unsure if he should say anything. His life had been a series of meetings, contracts, and boardrooms. Never a street corner, never a child begging for scraps of food. But something in him shifted. He knelt down, careful not to startle her, and said softly, "Did you need some help?" Her eyes flicked up, cautious, wary of strangers. He realized immediately that this wasn't fear, it was survival instinct, a shield she'd had to build too early in life. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small bag of groceries he grabbed on impulse from a nearby store. "This is for you and your brother," he said, his voice barely louder than a whisper. The girl's hands froze on the bottle. She didn't speak, didn't move. But the way her eyes softened, the almost imperceptible node felt like he'd just broken through a wall built over years. He stayed there, talking quietly, making no assumptions, sharing only what he knew about kindness and trust, while she kept a tight grip on her brother. People walking by glanced at them, some staring, some averting their eyes. But he didn't care. In that moment, nothing else existed except the small family in front of him and the tiny connection forming between them. It was as if the world had slowed down just for this corner of the street. He learned her name, Lila, and then her brother, little Jonah. He listened to her story, fragmented and halting, full of heartbreak and courage, learning about the nights they went hungry, the cold corners they called home, the people who passed without noticing. Each word pressed in on him, a sharp reminder of the life so many lived in silence while he had spent his days in comfort. Without planning it, he started thinking about what he could do. Not just today, not just with a bag of groceries, but for the long run. Shelter, education, medical care. The more he listened, the clearer it became. Meeting Lila and Jonah was no accident. It was a Kala challenge to act. He reached out to a few trusted contacts that night, people he knew could make a difference quickly. By morning, arrangements were already in motion. Temporary housing, access to resources, even someone to help her enroll in school. Every step was measured, deliberate, but also urgent. Time had been stolen from her childhood, and he wasn't going to waste a moment. Over the next few days, he returned to check on them, each visit revealing more resilience than he imagined possible. Lila was cautious but curious, her trust growing slowly, a flicker at a time. Jonah, too young to understand everything, clung to his sister, but something in a way he looked at the millionaire hinted at recognition, like he knew help had arrived. And then, the moment came that would change his life forever. As he left the shelter where they were staying one evening, Lila tugged at his sleeve. "Thank you for seeing us," she whispered, eyes bright, voice steady. In that instant, he realized something profound. He hadn't just saved them. They had saved him too, from complacency, from the hollow routine of wealth without meaning, from forgetting that real impact comes from connection, from showing up when it matters most. The story spread quietly at first, then more broadly. Friends, colleagues, even strangers were inspired. But he never sought the spotlight. His reward wasn't recognition, it was watching Lila's laughter return, seeing Jonah sleep safely for the first time in months, witnessing a little girl reclaim the chance to be a child. And in a strange, beautiful way, they had transformed him. Meetings no longer felt empty. Boardroom victories no longer satisfying. They were real only if they could extend into the lives of people like Lila and Jonah. And that realization, that was priceless. So, tell me, what would you do if a moment like this landed on your doorstep? Could you act, really act, beyond hesitation and doubt? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your take, because sometimes these stories aren't just theirs, they're a mirror for all of us, asking what we're willing to see and how far we're willing to go.